everyone, welcome back to the blacksmith shop. Let's forge up a sign for a horse ranch. Let me start at the beginning. So one of the things I love about community is we all know different things. We all have different skills. We're not just born into this world just knowing everything. How boring would that be? Well, a friend of mine did me a huge favor. So I did what any other skilled person does, is I wanted to trade the work. So I forged him a brand new sign for his horse ranch. A sign for a horse ranch. I don't want to just make a post with a rectangle and have them stick a sign in it. No, it's got to be something cool. I got to maxify it a little bit, max it out. Now, when it came to the design process, I kind of thought to myself, what makes a horse, so iconic, so special? And for me, it's that side profile, that silhouette with the cheek and where the mane comes down, that intelligent eye, and of course, the smell of their snout. That's where I started. I started when, where the sign would be the front shoulder and then the silhouette continued on after. I could almost hear the Riders of Rohan music from the Lord of the Rings when I was designing it. So when it comes to a sign, a proper sign, there's quite a bit of information required. Addresses, a name, all that stuff. And I want the sign to be interesting, not just a sign just sitting there. I wanted to split it up a little bit, so I split it up amongst two circles where they could have the name of their ranch all nice and on its own, and then having the address separate. So I split them up. My first step was the actual pillar. This pillar that I was going to create that, is triangular in nature, and it's fun to bring some interesting geometry to the board a little bit, rather than just making a box. Make it interesting, but still be structural all at the same time. So I created a funny little cardboard jig. I highly suggest this do your work, especially if you have to replicate a certain motif over and over and over. And since there was gonna be quite a few of these, I created a little jig so I can replicate perfectly all the time. There's something really magical about a perfect circle, or at least the concept of a perfect circle. It's an impossible scenario, but trying to get that circle as perfect as possible is a bit of an obsession. When you cut out a steel plate, it's wobbly, you know, it's like, it's got no structure to it. So what I need to do is create a beam, right? I needed to bring some steel up on edge, 90 degrees to strengthen it. So I needed a ring. I was able to implement my old ring roller that I made when I was a teenager. I love that some old tools that I made way back when are still serving me today. A very fun and interesting challenge is always to get an image from the piece of paper as it is there onto a piece of steel. And that's why I draw everything to scale. I created a little grid that I can replicate onto a piece of steel. And then where each little square is, I then draw what is inside that little square. And then sure enough, before long, suddenly this horse had began to take shape right before my eyes. Well, then came the time to roll more and more rings. And I stuck that between the triangular, rectangular pieces of bar to be able to transfer load across. So if I didn't do that, all of those beams would be able to shift just like this. You'll be able to lean and sway in the wind, which is something terribly embarrassing to see steel wibbling and wobbling if inclement weather might have happened. This needs to be strong. So I put those rings into the center to be able to share the load and connect everything together almost like a web. Now there is a bit of a flaw of my ring tool. You know, when I bring that piece of steel all the way around, especially the little ones, there's flat spots in the ends, and that comes with most rollers. Maybe in the next roller, I'll figure out a way to where I can circumvent that. There's a little bit more work to be done over the anvil. You know, making sure those curves meet where when you spin the ring, it's perfect. You know, you never know where that seam might be once I connect it all together. There's a really magical moment when it comes to building things. It's a moment where your components begin to connect. Think about, like, remember playing with Legos? playing with Legos, and then you make this component, and then you make this component, and it's not really taking shape until you place them together. And then it's starting to take shape, and you start getting excited about starting to see this creation come into reality. It's one of my favorite moments, and connecting the horse's kind of facial structure to the disc sign was a really magical moment. Quickly, all of these components begin to connect. The way I chose to build this sign is wildly more difficult than if I could just build a square or maybe even just a circle, the post that is. I give myself a lot of work, but I love it because there's a reason you don't see stuff like this, because it's hard. And sometimes doing the hard thing is the right thing. I got my angle finder set up to where, the post was perfectly flat, linear on the horizon, plumb. And then I used an angle finder to get that perfect triangular degree to where everything is nice and even just before welding it all up. It's fun to be able to problem solve all of these geometric problems that need to be solved. At this point of the build, things were getting very geometric. Well, we can't have that. We needed some decorative corbels to support this thing. Like I said, we can't have this thing wibbling and wobbling and shimmying in the wind. No, this thing's gotta be strong. So, forged out some lovely fishtail scrolls that act as gussets, supports. These scrolls come in adding so much strength, but also a little bit of design, a little bit of beauty. Now that we have all of the structural geometry in place, now comes the best part, is when I can now enact flow. So I began forging out bars of steel, just forging them all out, tapering them out really nice, to almost start with a bar of steel that goes out to nothing. Most of this process is done hot, fresh out of the forge. And then some of it is done cold over the swedge block. And the reason I do that is so I can have really nice, smooth transitions. Because where my fingers meet is real hot, it'll just bend where it's hot. If it's all the same temperature, I'm able to get really lovely bends, really lovely flow, which is really important when you're trying to almost capture what wind looks like. Now, each one of these bars of steel is to create the illusion of the mane. The mane either on a sprinting horse or perhaps one just looking into the wind, just movement. This sign needed movement somehow, and the mane was the way I can do it. So each bar of steel is very important to create some level of movement, and they all have to interact with each other. They all have to make sense. This takes some time and a lot of eye. This is where a lot of time spending just looking at things pays off, is seeing how whirlpools move, how a dust devil moves around on a dusty road, right? This is where all your observations pay off, is being able to see how things like to move. And it takes a lot of time. You forge a little bit, hold it up, forge a little bit more, hold it back up, and then weld it back into place. It's a really fun practice because you are so engaged. You cannot be anywhere else but be right there, fully present. Now that the main is done, I then puzzled a little bit about how do I help them secure their sign to the sign, because they were going to have it to where it's printed out and it needs to be stuck there. I puzzled long and hard. How do I stick non-metallic surfaces to this surface? There's many ways. You can have a threaded screw sort of a situation, but being outdoors, threads always lock up and seize. So I thought, how do I stick this thing on there without threads? And then I had it. Magnets. Small, numerous neodymium magnets. And I would stick them across a ring, drilling little pilot holes, sticking them in with a type of epoxy. And then you just place your circular sign up there and then bring this ring in and pow! It rips it right out of your hands. And it sticks it on, and they could always very easily pull that off and change the information if they want to. If they want to change their logo or their address adjusts, who knows what might happen. So it's really fun. Maybe they just don't even like the font, but it's really fun to be able to give them options to where they can easily take the sign off, replace it with whatever, and put it back on. Then once powder coating was finished, all I had to do was load it on the trailer and take myself a little road trip to my friend's house. There are few joys greater than seeing the smile on a friend's face when you give them a gift. This wasn't even a gift, this was a trade. But it's always a wonderful feeling when they feel like they got the better end of the bargain. Bartering is such a wonderful thing, and I highly suggest you give it a shot next time you need a little favor. So I dropped the sign off for my friend to install at his leisure, and he just recently sent me some photos of it completed, and it turned out great. He couldn't be happier, neither could I, and that's irreplaceable. Thank you for joining me on this little adventure. I have so many exciting projects coming down the line, which I cannot wait to share every second with you. And as always, my friends, thank you for watching.